Scrapper is one of my recommended class for new Lostark players. Reason being is she is tanky enough, have good maneuvers, and have all the skill kits to go through all the mechanics bosses and dungeons that challenge you. I didn't know enough about Scrapper to filter out what I can teach you guys, so I have my Scrapper one trick friend to help me clarify some of my thoughts. Scrapper has two main builds. They're both back attack oriented, and biggest differences are speed based and combination of skills. You have two resource bars, Spirit and Shock. Taijitsu utilizes the Spirit section, and Shock Training utilizes the Shock resources to activate her skill. Let's go over her important skills first before going into her builds and playstyles in detail. Charging Blow. This is Scrapper's most important skill. If you level up your ready attack tripod, it increases your attack power by 27.6% at max level for 3 seconds. The goal is to land your skills after your charging blow, so it is crucial for this skill to be quick on cooldown and casting time. As for Taijitsu, you level up to max for DPS, while Shock puts it on 7 or 4 if you're lacking on skill points. If sufficient cooldown gems and Gale Winds are in place, you can keep this buff up 100% of the time. Not much on Shock, but for Taijitsu it is crucial to have this buff 100% of the time. So I press Q here, it's for 3 seconds, and I press Q again to keep that 3-second up going. Crushing Smite, your synergy skill. The first tripod gives you 6% in damage. Taijitsu uses it at 4, but Shock Training Build puts it at level 7 due to Focus Tripod, where it provides extra shock energy. You can use any runes for this, but Cleanse or Rage or any other buff runes are pretty good. As for using this skill, you don't need to use the whole thing. You can just tap it once for a quick synergy. Fierce Tiger Strike, your other synergy skill, plus buff similar to Ready Attack on Charging Blow. This skill is crucial for shock training due to all 3 tripods giving assets that is helpful for shock training. There is synergy, shock gain, and the buff. Taijitsu on the other hand doesn't really need this skill due to charging blow will be at such short cooldown and have other options as well. As for runes, most people take buff related runes like Bleed, Rage, and Cleanse. As you notice, the skill is very quick. Dragon Advent, optional movement skill for shock, DPS super armor skill for Taijitsu. Taijitsu uses it for DPS, so DPS tripods are selected. They also have an option to have super armor or not in the second tripod. Shock on the other hand can use it for additional mobility, with additional distance and super armor. Another interesting tip my friend has told me is, utilizing your Dragon Advent is crucial. Let's say you're away from the boss due to a mechanic. If you happen to gap close with the head with charging blow, you will miss a lot of DPS opportunities because you're positioned on the head side. So instead, if you use a Dragon Advent first in a diagonal, you can reposition yourself twice instead of once. Instant Hit. This is a counter skill for Taijitsu. This can also be used as a DPS skill due to the second tripod. Shock does not use this. Any buff runes like Rage, Bleed, Cleanse can be used. You also have another option of dashing forward or attacking in a 360. Earthquake Chain. DPS skill for Taijitsu, using the burn tripod and DPS tripods. You have an option to use a quicker one hit, or you have an option to have combination of hits. Gale Wind rune is often used here. Battering Fists, DPS skill for Taijitsu, utilizing DPS related tripods. Gale Wind rune is often used here. Iron Cannon Blow, main DPS skill for Taijitsu. This does one of the highest damage, having DPS, cooldown, and damage and movement tripods. Going over to the shock skills, we have Judgment, another optional synergy skill in the shock section. Some Taijitsu players use Judgment instead of Crushing Smite. Reason being is sometimes if you have too much swiftness, your spread runs out. Since both skills are not that much different in damage, this can be a decent choice. Runes are same as Crushing Smite. So the animation difference would be Crushing Smite is this, and then Judgment would be that. It's not much of a big difference, but if you're lacking Spirit, you can use Judgment instead. Roundup Sweep, one of the best counters in the game. If you're planning to use the skill, you must put it to level 10, because it's a totally different skill under level 10. Under level 10, it looks like this. At level 10, it's a totally different skill. The skill has a chance to reset on crit if you have the first tripod, and in RNGs on both hits. So more crit you do, you have a higher chance to reset the skill. The Shock Training Build uses this as a counter. Taijitsu also use it sometimes if they're uncomfortable with instant hit skill. Any runes can be used like Rage, Recharge, and Bleed. Death Rattle, main DPS skill for Shock Build, but also used in Taijitsu. Taijitsu takes 1 or 2 shock skills to balance out the resources, and this is one of the most all scrappers take. The skill's base damage is high enough to be utilized in both builds. You have the cooldown tripod and 2 damaging tripods. Gale Wind runes are used to quicken the casting. One thing to keep in mind, the skill's damage is dependent on how much shock energy you have, since it uses all of your shock energy. You need to be able to eyeball how much shock energy you have to maximize the damage of the skill. Since Roundup Sweep uses 20, This will be 80 shock energy. As long as you're above 76 shock energy, you can do the max damage. So you can kind of eyeball it out where it is and use the death rattle skill accordingly. Critical blow, optional skill for shock build. It is a stagger tripod where it increases stagger point by 20% for 6 seconds. Tripod's user for quick casting. Any runes can be used. Chain Destruction Fist, main DPS skill for shock. It also has option to have super armor. The casting time is long, so it's crucial to use it right after a charging blow for full effect. Gyoen runes are used to shorten the cast time. As you can see, you have to use your Destruction Fist right away after your charging blow, because the buff only lasts 3 seconds. True Rising Fist, DPS skill for shock. You have a choice in the first tripods on how fast the skill is going to be casted. One rises twice, and one charges. And the middle tripod is the shortest with DOT. Other tripods are pretty much set in stone for DPS, but the first one is a preference. Gyoen runes are used here. Supernova, DPS skill for shock, cooldown tripod, and set in stone DPS related tripods. Gyoen rune is used here. As for Awakening, you have 2 choices. Most people use the second one because it does more damage. Make sure you stay close when you're doing the Awakening because it does more damage. Now let's talk about the Taijitsu build first. This build utilizes most of the yellow skills. First, you have your Charging Blow and Crushing Smite as the most important skill. You have an option to take Judgment as well. And then you have a counter of your choice, Instant Attack or Sweeping Blow. And you need 1 shock skill to balance it out. So most people take Death Rattle. Then you have Dragon's Advent for movement skill, and your main 3 DPS skills. As for combat stats, it will be Crit and Swift. You will need to balance this out really well, since Scrapper does not have any other way to get crit. People tend to get higher crit combat stats over 1100, 1300, or even 1500. As for engravings, class engraving level 3 is mandatory because it affects your spirit regen. Then you have a choice of general DPS engravings like Grudge and Keen Blunt due to going high crit combat stat. Adrenaline and Master of Ambush is also a good choice. Eventually you'll have all of these engravings in the final build, so it'd be wise to choose basically on your growth. For example, you have the Taijitsu at level 3. If you feel that you're comfortable doing back attacks, you would go Master of Ambush first. If you're not getting hit as much and you're comfortable in the combat, you would go Grudge. If you think you have high enough crit, you would go Keen Blunt. If you think you lack crit, you would go Adrenaline. And you keep adding more engravements naturally as you progress through the game. As for gems, you would focus on the cooldown gem on Charging Blow, because everything starts with a Charging Blow. And damage gems on your main DPS skills, with cooldown on covering it up, should be good enough. As for playstyle, as mentioned earlier, every cycle needs to rotate based on your Charging Blow. You can use about 2 yellow skills or 1 shock skill after Charging Blow. Make sure you use your Charging Blow and Crushing Smite on every cooldown for maximum efficiency for yourself and your party. Now let's talk about shock. The fundamentals are about the same, but they take different skills. First, you take Crushing Blow. Level 10 is recommended due to increase in attack speed at last tripod. But if you lack skill points, 4 is good enough. Then you have Fierce Tiger Strike. Level 10 is also recommended here for all the buffs, but 7 is mandatory for spirit gain and synergy skills. Then you have an option to take Crushing Smite for additional synergy and shock gains, or Dragon's Advent for movement skills. Afterwards, you have your Sweeping Blow counter, and your 4 main DPS skills. As for combat stats, you would go full on Spec, and sub on Crit, because Spec impacts your shock skills damage, and the rest being Crit because Scrappers lack a little bit on Crit. And as for engravings, it's a similar case to Taijitsu. So level 3 shock training is mandatory, and you have an option to take Grudge, Keen Blunt, Master of Ambush, and Adrenaline. There's also an option to replace one of the damage engraving into Spirit Absorption, because shock training Scrapper tends to be a little on the slower side. As for gems, it's the same case. Cooldown gems on the buff and synergy skills, and damage gems on your main DPS skills, with cooldowns to back it up. Playstyle is about the same, but at a much slower pace. You use your shock DPS skill after Charging Blow. Then you use your other Taijitsu skill before using another shock DPS skill. The only mechanics you need to be careful on is your Death Rattle skill. You need to make sure your shock energy is recovered enough before using the skill, because it will do much lower damage if you have less than 76% shock meter. And that wraps up the video. Scrapper is a very easy forgiving class that can be very strong in the early games. She's a jack of all trades class to help you learn the general knowledge in the game. As always, thanks again. Bye!